When Sarah Johnson, a 45-year-old janitor from Brooklyn, walked into the Goldman and Associates boardroom in Manhattan to empty the trash cans, she had no idea that in 30 minutes she would be sitting at the negotiating table closing a $150 million deal that would save the company from bankruptcy. How did a woman who earned $15 an hour cleaning executive bathrooms manage to dominate an international negotiation that Harvard-trained lawyers couldn't solve? And why had she kept this secret for 8 years, working invisibly in the corridors of Wall Street? This is the story of Sarah Johnson, the American janitor who spoke 7 languages fluently and transformed her life from cleaning lady to multimillionaire CEO, proving that the biggest mistake of the powerful is underestimating those they don't even notice exist. At 5:47 a.m. on that cold December morning, Sarah's alarm clock pierced through the silence of her one-bedroom apartment in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn. The radiator clanged like a broken symphony, and frost covered the single window that looked out onto a brick wall just 3 feet away. Sarah rolled out of her twin bed, her joints protesting after another night on the thin mattress she'd bought at a secondhand store 4 years ago. The apartment cost her $1,400 a month, nearly 60% of her income. But it was the cheapest place she could find that was still safe enough to walk home to. After her night shifts ended at 11 p.m., she shuffled to the tiny kitchenette, no bigger than a closet, and turned on the electric kettle. While waiting for the water to boil, Sarah looked at herself in the cracked mirror hanging above the sink. Deep lines had formed around her dark brown eyes, testament to years of working double shifts and caring for her diabetic mother until she passed away 2 years ago. Her graying hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, practical and invisible, just like everything else about her appearance. She wore the same uniform every day: navy blue polo shirt, black slacks, and comfortable sneakers that had seen better days. This was the uniform of invisible America, the people who kept the corporate world running while remaining completely unseen. The kettle whistled, and Sarah poured hot water over instant coffee in a chipped mug that read, "World's Greatest Mom," a Mother's Day gift from her son Marcus before he left for college. Marcus was now 23, working as a graphic designer in Portland, Oregon, sending her $100 every month even though she insisted he didn't need to. He had no idea about his mother's secret abilities, believing she had only finished high school and worked as a janitor because it was the only job she could get. That was the story Sarah had told him and everyone else for the past 8 years. The truth was far more complicated and painful than anyone could imagine. Sarah had not only graduated high school, but had earned a bachelor's degree in international business from Brooklyn College, studying at night while working 3 jobs to support her family. She spoke 7 languages fluently: English, Spanish, French, German, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, and Arabic. She had learned them through a combination of library books, community college courses, and countless conversations with immigrants in her neighborhood. Her mother had worked as a flower vendor in Chinatown on weekends, and young Sarah would spend hours there, listening to the rhythms of Mandarin and Cantonese, picking up phrases from elderly Chinese women who appreciated her genuine interest in their language. But life had not been kind to Sarah's dreams. At 25, she was working as a junior analyst at a small investment firm in Lower Manhattan when the 2008 financial crisis hit. The firm collapsed overnight, and Sarah found herself unemployed along with millions of other Americans. With her mother's medical bills mounting and her young son to support, she took the first job she could find, cleaning offices at night. It was supposed to be temporary, just until she could find something better. But temporary became permanent when her mother's diabetes worsened and required constant care. The cleaning job provided health insurance and flexible hours that allowed Sarah to be home during the day when Marcus returned from school. Years passed, and Sarah watched from the shadows as Wall Street recovered from the crisis. She witnessed meetings, mergers, and deals worth billions of dollars while she emptied trash cans and vacuumed carpets. The executives never noticed her, treating her like a piece of furniture, talking freely about confidential matters as if she didn't exist. In their minds, a middle-aged black janitor couldn't possibly understand or care about their sophisticated business dealings. They were catastrophically wrong. Goldman & Associates was a prestigious investment firm located on the 47th floor of a gleaming tower in Midtown Manhattan. The company specialized in international mergers and acquisitions, with particular expertise in Asian markets. Sarah had been cleaning their offices for 8 years, arriving every evening at 6 p.m. and working until 11 p.m. She knew every corner of that building, every executive's habits, every deal that was cooking behind closed doors. She had inadvertently received a graduate-level education in international finance simply by listening and observing. Michael Goldman, the 52-year-old CEO and founding partner, was everything Sarah was not: privileged, powerful, and supremely confident in his place in the world. Standing 6 feet tall with silver hair and a perpetual tan from weekend trips to the Hamptons, Goldman wore $1,000 suits and Swiss watches that cost more than Sarah's annual salary. He had graduated from Wharton Business School, inherited $50 million from his real estate developer father, and had built Goldman & Associates into a $2 billion operation over the past 15 years. His corner office overlooking Central Park was a temple to his success. Leather-bound books, expensive artwork, and photographs of himself with presidents and foreign ministers. Goldman treated Sarah like she was invisible, which suited her just fine. When she cleaned his office, he would continue his phone calls as if she weren't there, discussing deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars while she dusted his mahogany desk. He had never learned her name in 8 years, referring to her simply as the cleaning lady, when he bothered to acknowledge her existence at all. To Goldman, Sarah represented everything he looked down upon: poor, uneducated, powerless. He couldn't have been more wrong about any of those assumptions. The other executives at Goldman & Associates were cut from the same cloth as their boss. There was Jennifer Martinez, the 38-year-old head of Asian operations, who spoke fluent Japanese and had an MBA from Columbia. David Chen, the 42-year-old merger specialist, was born in Taiwan and had dual citizenship, making him invaluable for deals involving Chinese companies. Robert Williams, the 45-year-old chief financial officer, had worked at Goldman Sachs for 10 years before joining the firm. All of them earned 7-figure salaries, drove luxury cars, and lived in Manhattan penthouses or Westchester mansions. And all of them saw Sarah as nothing more than part of the building's infrastructure. That Tuesday morning in December started like any other for Sarah. She took the subway from Brooklyn to Manhattan, a journey that required 2 transfers and took an hour and 15 minutes each way. The train was crowded with other working-class New Yorkers heading to jobs that kept the city functioning: hospital orderlies, security guards, retail workers, food service employees. Sarah sat quietly, listening to podcasts about international business on her phone through dollar store earbuds. She had subscriptions to the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, and Harvard Business Review, reading them on her phone during her commute. Her co-workers at the cleaning company thought she was obsessed with celebrity gossip. They had no idea she was staying current with global market trends. When Sarah arrived at Goldman & Associates that evening, the office was buzzing with unusual tension. She could feel it the moment she stepped off the elevator. Normally, most executives would have gone home by 6 p.m., but tonight the office was fully occupied. She could hear raised voices coming from the conference room, and several junior analysts were frantically typing at their computers, clearly working on something urgent. Sarah began her routine, starting with the bathrooms and working her way through the individual offices, her ears attuned to every conversation. What she learned over the next hour made her stomach churn with anxiety, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Goldman & Associates was in serious trouble. Their biggest client, Yamamoto Industries from Tokyo, was pulling out of a massive deal that would have generated $200 million in fees for the firm. The withdrawal was happening because of a communication breakdown with a potential Chinese partner, Tianlong Manufacturing, owned by billionaire Li Wei. The three-way partnership was supposed to revolutionize manufacturing technology across Asia, but cultural misunderstandings and translation errors had derailed months of negotiations. Michael Goldman was pacing his office like a caged animal, screaming into his phone at various contacts in Asia. "I don't care what time it is in Shanghai. Get Li Wei on the phone. This deal cannot fall apart. Sarah watched him through the glass walls as she cleaned the adjacent conference room. His usually perfect hair was disheveled. His tie loosened, and sweat stains were visible on his expensive shirt despite the December cold outside. The problem was not just one deal, Sarah learned. Goldman and Associates had leveraged heavily to finance this transaction, borrowing against their future commission fees. If the deal collapsed, the firm would be on the hook for $50 million in loans that were coming due in 30 days. Goldman had bet everything on this partnership, convinced that his reputation and connections would guarantee success. Now, facing the possibility of bankruptcy, he was discovering that reputation meant nothing when cultural barriers and language barriers destroyed trust between potential partners. Jennifer Martinez was equally frantic, making call after call to contacts in Tokyo and Beijing. "Mr. Lee feels insulted by our approach," she explained to Goldman during a brief break in her phone marathon. "The interpreter we used last week apparently used language that was considered extremely rude in Chinese business culture. Li Wei thinks we don't respect him or his company. Yamamoto Industries is now questioning whether we have the cultural competence to manage ASEAN partnerships. His assistants keep saying he's unavailable, but I think he's freezing us out completely. In Chinese business culture, once trust is broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. We may have lost him permanently. We've got about 12 million in liquid assets, but that's nowhere near enough. We'd have to sell the building, liquidate everything, and we'd still come up short." She had overheard enough of the conference calls to know that the interpreter they had used was fluent in Mandarin, but completely ignorant of business etiquette and formal protocol. In Chinese business culture, respect and hierarchy are paramount, and the wrong tone or choice of words can destroy relationships that took years to build. More importantly, Sarah knew something the executives didn't. Li Wei was scheduled to fly to New York the next day for what was supposed to be the final signing ceremony. His flight was landing at JFK at 3 p.m., and he had originally planned to come directly to the Goldman and Associates offices to conclude the deal. According to the overheard conversations, Li Wei's assistants had not yet confirmed whether he would honor that appointment or simply return to China without meeting. Sarah also knew, from her careful listening over the years, that Li Wei was not just any businessman. He was one of China's most successful entrepreneurs, worth an estimated $8 billion. But he had grown up in poverty in rural China and placed enormous value on personal character and authenticity. He despised arrogance and responded positively to humility and genuine respect. The Goldman and Associates team, in their typical American business fashion, had approached him with confidence that bordered on arrogance, apparently believing that their prestige and track record would be enough to close the deal. But there was something else, something that made Sarah's heart race as she pieced together the full situation. During one of his phone conversations, she had heard Michael Goldman mention that Li Wei had specifically requested to tour Goldman and Associates offices to see how the company really operates and who the people are who work there. This was apparently a Chinese business tradition, wanting to understand the character and culture of a potential partner. Goldman had planned to show Li Wei the executive floors, the conference rooms, and the trading floor, presenting a carefully curated image of American corporate success. Li Wei, however, had specifically said he wanted to see all the people who make the company work, from the top executives to the people who keep the lights on. Goldman had dismissed this as a translation quirk and had not planned to introduce Li Wei to any support staff. In Chinese culture, this was potentially another massive insult, suggesting that Goldman considered certain workers beneath notice. As Sarah continued her cleaning routine, moving through the offices like a ghost, she found herself in a unique position. She understood the cultural dynamics that had destroyed the negotiations. She spoke fluent Mandarin at a business level, having practiced for years by listening to Chinese business podcasts and reading Chinese financial newspapers online. She knew enough about Chinese business culture to navigate the complex world of relationships, respect, and protocol that governed high-level deals in that country. More than that, she understood Li Wei's background and motivations in a way that the Goldman and Associates executives, despite their expensive educations and professional experience, completely missed. They saw him as a wealthy Chinese businessman to be impressed with American corporate power. Sarah saw him as a self-made man who had risen from poverty through hard work and who valued authenticity above all else. But what could she do? She was just a cleaning lady, invisible and powerless. Even if she had the knowledge and language skills to potentially salvage the situation, who would listen to her? Michael Goldman had never even learned her name after 8 years. The idea of a black janitor from Brooklyn offering to save a $200 million international deal was so absurd that she almost laughed at herself for even considering it. As she cleaned the conference room where so many crucial decisions were made, Sarah allowed herself a moment of bitter reflection. She had spent 8 years watching other people build careers and make millions while she remained invisible, cleaning up after their successes. She had the education, the language skills, and the cultural knowledge that could potentially solve their crisis. But none of that mattered because of who she appeared to be on the surface. The irony was crushing. Goldman and Associates was failing because they couldn't communicate effectively with Chinese business culture, and their solution was to throw more money at expensive consultants and interpreters who were equally ignorant of the subtle cultural dynamics at play. Meanwhile, the person who could solve their problem was emptying their trash cans and scrubbing their bathrooms, completely invisible to their world. Sarah finished cleaning the conference room and moved on to Goldman's private office. He was still on the phone, now speaking to what sounded like a lawyer about bankruptcy procedures. His voice had lost its usual commanding tone and taken on a note of desperation that Sarah had never heard before. For the first time in the 8 years she had known him, Michael Goldman looked vulnerable and afraid. As she dusted his bookshelf, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. Hidden behind the business books and leadership manuals was a small framed photograph of a much younger Michael Goldman, standing next to an elderly man in overalls. The older man's hands were dirty and calloused, and he was smiling proudly at the camera while the young Goldman, probably in his early 20s, looked somewhat embarrassed. Sarah realized she was looking at a picture of Goldman with his grandfather, probably a blue-collar worker who had helped build the family fortune that Goldman had inherited. The photograph revealed something important about Goldman's character. Despite his arrogance and privilege, he had come from working-class roots, just like Sarah. His grandfather had probably been the kind of man who would have treated a janitor with respect and dignity. Somewhere along the way, as Goldman accumulated wealth and power, he had forgotten those lessons and had become the kind of person who looked down on others. Sarah finished cleaning Goldman's office and moved on to the next room, but her mind was churning with possibilities. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she might be the only person in New York City who could save Goldman and Associates from bankruptcy. She had the language skills, the cultural knowledge, and most importantly, the authenticity that Li Wei was looking for. But approaching Goldman with this offer would require courage that she wasn't sure she possessed. As she cleaned the offices of the other executives, Sarah continued to overhear fragments of desperate conversations. Jennifer Martinez was crying on the phone with someone, probably her husband, explaining that she might lose her job and their Manhattan lifestyle. David Chen was updating his resume, preparing for the possibility that the firm would collapse. Robert Williams was making contingency plans for staff layoffs, starting with the lowest paid employees. The cleaning staff would certainly be the first to go, Sarah realized. If Goldman and Associates went bankrupt, she would lose not only her job, but also her health insurance. At 45, with her employment gap and her visible identity as a janitor, finding another job with benefits would be nearly impossible. She would probably have to take 2 or 3 part-time jobs without insurance, and any medical emergency would be financially devastating. But beyond her personal concerns, Sarah found herself genuinely caring about the fate of Goldman and Associates. Despite their arrogance and blindness to her existence, she had spent 8 years watching these people work. She had seen them celebrate successes, comfort each other through failures, and build something significant together. The firm employed 150 people, from executives to analysts, to administrative staff to security guards. If it collapsed, all of those families would be affected. More than that, Sarah realized she had been emotionally invested in the company's success without even realizing it. For 8 years, she had been a silent witness to their deals, their strategies, their victories and defeats. In a strange way, she felt like part of the team, even though none of them knew she existed. She had watched Goldman & Associates grow from a 50-person firm to its current size, and she had taken quiet pride in their accomplishments. As she moved through the offices that night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was going to approach Michael Goldman and offer her services as an interpreter and cultural consultant for the Li Wei meeting. The worst thing that could happen was that he would laugh at her, fire her, and call security to escort her from the building. But if she said nothing, the company would collapse anyway, and she would lose her job regardless. The decision terrified her. For 8 years, she had maintained her invisibility as a survival strategy. Being noticed meant being vulnerable to judgment, discrimination, and rejection. But watching these people face the destruction of everything they had built made her realize that some risks were worth taking. Sarah spent the rest of her shift preparing for a conversation that could either save Goldman & Associates or end her employment in spectacular fashion. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would present her qualifications, and how she would convince Goldman to take a chance on his invisible janitor. As she worked, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope mixed with absolute terror. By 10:30 p.m., most of the executives had finally gone home, exhausted and defeated. The offices were quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Sarah had finished her cleaning routine, but instead of heading home to Brooklyn, she sat in the conference room where tomorrow's meeting with Li Wei was supposed to take place, if he decided to honor his appointment. She looked around the room where so many important decisions had been made, imagining what it would be like to sit at that table as an equal, rather than as someone cleaning it. The mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lighting, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Oil paintings of 19th century business titans looked down from the walls, men who had built American fortunes through vision, courage, and sometimes ruthlessness. For the first time in 8 years, Sarah allowed herself to imagine a different life. What if she had never lost her job in 2008? What if her mother hadn't gotten sick? What if she had been able to pursue her original dreams of working in international business? She might have been sitting in one of those leather chairs as an executive, negotiating deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But she also realized that her years of invisibility had given her something that none of the executives possessed: a deep understanding of what it meant to be underestimated and overlooked. She knew what it felt like to have valuable skills that no one recognized, to be judged by appearances rather than abilities. That understanding might be exactly what Li Wei was looking for in a business partner. Sarah stood up from the conference table and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of Manhattan at night. The city sparkled below her, millions of lights representing millions of dreams, struggles, and ambitions. Tomorrow, she would either continue being invisible, or she would step into the light and claim her place in this glittering world of power and money. As she finally prepared to leave the building, Sarah encountered Michael Goldman returning to his office. He looked haggard and defeated, his $1,000 suit wrinkled and his silver hair disheveled. He barely glanced at her as he passed, so absorbed in his crisis that he didn't even register her presence. Sarah watched him disappear into his office, and she knew that tomorrow would bring either salvation or disaster for both of them. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to her day job at a Brooklyn medical clinic, where she worked part-time filing insurance papers. She couldn't afford to lose the income, but she knew that today might be her only chance to change her life forever. She spent hours getting ready, choosing her best outfit, a navy blue dress she had bought for her mother's funeral, paired with her only pair of dress shoes and a blazer from a thrift store in Park Slope. Looking at herself in the mirror, Sarah saw someone she hadn't been in years. A professional woman with confidence and purpose. Her graying hair was styled instead of pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore the small pearl earrings that had been her mother's. For the first time in 8 years, Sarah Johnson looked like someone who belonged in a Manhattan boardroom rather than cleaning one. She arrived at Goldman & Associates at 2 p.m., an hour before Li Wei's scheduled arrival. The executives were in full crisis mode, making last-minute preparations for a meeting they weren't sure would even happen. Sarah took the elevator to the 47th floor, her heart pounding so hard she was afraid the other passengers could hear it. When the elevator doors opened, Sarah stepped into the world she had observed from the shadows for 8 years. But this time, instead of pushing a cleaning cart, she was walking toward the reception desk with the determination of someone who belonged there. What happened next would either destroy her life or transform it completely. Sarah Johnson, the invisible janitor from Brooklyn, was about to reveal herself to the world, and nothing would ever be the same again. The receptionist, Amanda, looked up from her computer with confusion. She had seen Sarah countless times over the years, but always in her cleaning uniform, always invisible, always pushing a cart full of supplies. Now, seeing her dressed professionally and approaching the front desk with purpose, Amanda didn't immediately recognize her. "Can I help you?" Amanda asked, her tone polite but puzzled. "I need to speak with Mr. Goldman immediately," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's about the Li Wei situation. If you'd like to leave a message, the confidence, the knowledge of confidential business matters, the perfect pronunciation of Mandarin." None of this matched her image of the quiet woman who had cleaned these offices for years. She picked up her phone, her hand trembling slightly. "Mr. Goldman, there's a woman here named Sarah Johnson who says she has a solution for the Li Wei situation. She claims to speak Mandarin," and Amanda paused, listening to Goldman's response. "Yes, sir. She says the company will go bankrupt unless you listen to her." Goldman, that 8 years ago. His grandfather wouldn't have dismissed someone based on their appearance. Tell him that Li Wei specifically requested to meet all the people who make this company work, including the people who keep the lights on. Tell him I'm one of those people, and I might be his only chance. The old photograph in his office had revealed more than Goldman probably realized about his character and his forgotten values. "Send her to my office," Goldman finally said, his voice tight with anger and desperation. "But make it quick. Li Wei lands in 2 hours, and we still don't know if he's coming here or going straight back to China." The offices she had cleaned in darkness were now filled with natural light and bustling activity. Analysts and associates who had never noticed her existence now looked up curiously as she passed. Word was already spreading through the office that someone was claiming to have a solution to their crisis. Goldman's office door was open, and Sarah could see him pacing behind his desk, his phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her approaching, his expression shifted from confusion to recognition, to complete bewilderment. This was his cleaning lady, the invisible woman who had emptied his trash for 8 years. But she looked entirely different. Professional, confident, articulate. "I'll call you back," Goldman said into his phone, hanging up without waiting for a response. He stared at Sarah for a long moment, his mind struggling to reconcile this poised woman with the person he had barely acknowledged for years. "You're the cleaning lady?" he said finally, his tone more confused than dismissive. "I'm Sarah Johnson," she replied, walking into his office with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "I've been working in this building for 8 years, and I've been listening to your conversations, learning about your business and watching you make decisions that have built this company into what it is today. Goldman, you've been conducting sensitive business discussions in front of me for 8 years, as if I didn't exist. You never asked me to leave the room or stop working when you were on important calls. You treated me like furniture, and now you're angry that the furniture was listening." He had assumed she was too uneducated or disinterested to comprehend what she was hearing. The realization that he had been conducting confidential business in front of someone he had completely underestimated was both embarrassing and terrifying. "What do you want?" Goldman asked, his voice defensive. "Money? Are you trying to blackmail us?" "Your interpreter insulted him last week by using language that suggested disrespect and cultural superiority. Your team has been approaching him with typical American business arrogance, which is exactly the opposite of what works in Chinese business culture. If he comes to this office today and sees the same attitude that destroyed the first negotiation, he'll get back on his plane and your company will be bankrupt within a month. Everything she said was accurate, but how could she possibly know these details? How do you know about Li Wei's reaction to our interpreter? And most importantly, I understand Li Wei himself. In 8 years, have you ever asked me about my background, my education, or my life outside this building? I spent my childhood there, learning Mandarin from native speakers. I have a bachelor's degree in international business from Brooklyn College. I worked as a junior analyst at Morrison & Associates until the 2008 crash destroyed the company. I took this cleaning job temporarily to support my family, and it became permanent when my mother got sick. For 8 years, I've been cleaning your offices while listening to your deals, your strategies, your successes and failures. I've received an advanced education in international finance just by paying attention to your business. How could I possibly explain that our interpreter is a janitor? The fact that you're willing to trust someone based on their abilities rather than their resume will actually impress him. If you really speak business-level Mandarin, prove it right now. She explained Li Wei's background, his business philosophy, and the cultural mistakes that Goldman and Associates had made in their previous interactions. Goldman stared at her in amazement. He couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the confidence and fluency in her voice. This was clearly not basic conversational Chinese. This was the language of someone who could navigate complex business negotiations with native speakers. "My God," he whispered. "How did you learn to speak like that?" "While you were assuming I was too stupid to understand your conversations, I was getting a graduate-level education in your industry. I want a permanent position as Director of International Cultural Relations, with a salary commensurate with my education and abilities. I want recognition for my contributions to this company's success, and I want respect, not just from you, but from everyone in this building who has treated me as invisible for 8 years. But Sarah, if this goes badly, if Li Wei is offended, or if the deal falls apart because of your involvement, we'll all go down together. The fact that you're willing to listen to someone like me, to recognize ability regardless of appearance, that's exactly the kind of authenticity he's looking for. They need to accept that I'm leading this negotiation, at least the cultural and linguistic aspects. Second, we need to completely change the approach. No more corporate presentations or PowerPoint slides showing your company's achievements. Li Wei wants to have a conversation, not a sales pitch. Third, and this is crucial, he wants to meet the people who actually make this company work. That includes support staff, not just executives. Li Wei specifically requested to see how your company really operates and who the people are who work here, Sarah explained. You plan to show him only the executive floors, but he wants to understand the complete culture of your organization. He wants to meet the security guards, the administrative assistants, the maintenance staff. In Chinese business culture, the way a leader treats their lowest paid employees reveals their true character. We can't introduce a Chinese billionaire to our support staff. What would he think of our company? He's looking for business partners who share those values of humility and respect for working people. What else do we need to do? Most importantly, Sarah explained, they would show Li Wei that Goldman and Associates was the kind of company that recognized and valued talent regardless of its source. The fact that their most qualified Chinese cultural expert had been working as a janitor would actually be seen as a positive thing, proof that the company was ready to look beyond surface appearances to find real ability. As they prepared for the meeting, word spread through the Goldman and Associates offices that something extraordinary was happening. The cleaning lady was meeting with the CEO, and somehow she was involved in saving the company from bankruptcy. Analysts and associates who had never noticed Sarah's existence were now asking who she was and how she had become central to their survival. Jennifer Martinez was the most shocked of all. As head of Asian operations, she had been frantically trying to salvage the Li Wei relationship, using every contact and strategy she could think of. Now she was learning that the solution had been emptying trash cans in the office next to hers for 8 years. "This is insane," Jennifer said to David Chen as they watched Sarah and Goldman preparing for the meeting. "How could we not know that she speaks Mandarin? How could we not know about her background?" 3 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up to the entrance, followed by a security detail that had been coordinating with building management all week. Li Wei traveled with a small army of assistants, translators, and security personnel, as befitted one of China's wealthiest and most influential businessmen. Sarah watched from Goldman's office window as Li Wei emerged from the lead vehicle. He was smaller than she had expected, probably no more than 5 feet 6 inches tall, with graying hair and a simple dark suit that could have been purchased at any department store. There was nothing about his appearance that screamed wealth or power, which was exactly what Sarah had anticipated. Li Wei had spent his entire career proving that substance mattered more than appearances. He looked so ordinary, Goldman murmured, standing beside Sarah at the window. "That's the point," Sarah replied. "Li Wei doesn't need to display his wealth or power because he's secure in who he is. He's looking for business partners who share that confidence, who don't need to prove their worth through expensive suits or fancy offices." Instead, following Sarah's advice, Goldman waited in his office while Sarah went downstairs to personally escort Li Wei and his team to the 47th floor. When the elevator doors opened and Li Wei stepped into the Goldman and Associates lobby, the first person he saw was Sarah Johnson. She approached him with the proper, respectful posture that Chinese business culture demanded. Her hands clasped in front of her, her head slightly bowed in a gesture of honor. "Li Xiansheng," Sarah said in perfect Mandarin, using the formal title of respect. "Welcome to Goldman and Associates. I am Sarah Johnson, and I have the honor of serving as your cultural consultant and interpreter today." More than that, she was demonstrating the kind of cultural sensitivity that had been completely absent from his previous interactions with Goldman and Associates. "Miss Johnson?" Li Wei replied in Mandarin, his voice warm with appreciation. "Your pronunciation is excellent. Where did you learn to speak Chinese? I have great respect for Chinese business traditions and the wisdom they represent. I understand that you have traveled very far to be here today, and we are deeply honored by your presence." His previous interactions with the company had been dominated by American businessmen who spoke loudly, moved too quickly, and seemed more interested in impressing him with their achievements than in understanding his needs and values. "I am pleased to meet you, Miss Johnson," Li Wei said. "I look forward to our conversation." She asked about Li Wei's flight, his impressions of New York and his family, all in perfect Mandarin, and with exactly the right tone of respectful interest. Li Wei was increasingly impressed. This woman understood not just his language, but his cultural expectations. She was taking time to build a personal connection before diving into business matters, which showed wisdom and patience. Most American business people wanted to start negotiations immediately, but Sarah was demonstrating that she understood the proper way to develop trust and mutual respect. When the elevator doors opened on the 47th floor, Michael Goldman was waiting in the reception area, flanked by his senior executives. But instead of the formal, corporate greeting he had originally planned, Goldman followed Sarah's coaching and offered a more personal, humble approach. "Mr. Li," Goldman said, with Sarah translating simultaneously, "We are deeply grateful that you have traveled so far to meet with us. We understand that trust is the foundation of all business relationships, and we hope to earn your trust today through our actions rather than our words." Someone had clearly educated them about Chinese business culture, and that someone was obviously the remarkable woman who was serving as their interpreter. As they walked toward the conference room, Li Wei asked Sarah a question that made everyone else nervous. "Miss Johnson, what is your role at Goldman and Associates? Are you a senior executive here?" "Li, I have worked at this company for 8 years in various capacities. My title is changing today, but my commitment to this company and my respect for your culture have remained constant throughout my time here." The conference room had been transformed according to Sarah's instructions. Instead of the usual corporate setup with a long table creating distance between participants, the furniture had been arranged to encourage conversation. Fresh flowers adorned the table, along with high-quality Chinese tea that Sarah had personally selected from a shop in Chinatown. Everything was designed to show respect for Chinese customs and to create an atmosphere of equality rather than intimidation. As everyone took their seats, Li Wei made another request that would have derailed the original plan completely. Miss Johnson, I would very much like to meet some of the other people who work at Goldman and Associates. In my experience, you can learn more about a company by talking to the employees at every level than you can from any presentation or financial report. We would be honored to introduce you to our team. She turned to Goldman, speaking in English. Mr. Goldman, would you like to invite some of our colleagues to join us? They included Maria Gonzalez, a security guard who had worked at the building for 15 years, Thomas Washington, an administrative assistant who coordinated travel and logistics for the executives, and Janet Kim, an analyst who had started as an intern and worked her way up through the company. As these employees entered the conference room, Sarah could see Li Wei's face light up with genuine interest. This was exactly what he had been hoping to see. A company leader who was willing to introduce him to workers at every level of the organization. Sarah facilitated introductions between Li Wei and each employee, translating their conversations and helping them understand each other's perspectives. Li Wei asked thoughtful questions about their work, their experiences at the company, and their views on Goldman and Associates as an employer. Maria Gonzalez, the security guard, told Li Wei about how Goldman had personally helped her son get a scholarship to attend college. Thomas Washington described the company's flexible work policies that had allowed him to care for his elderly mother while maintaining his career. Janet Kim talked about the mentorship and growth opportunities that had enabled her to advance from intern to analyst. Li Wei was deeply impressed. These stories revealed a company culture that valued employees as human beings rather than just economic resources. This was exactly the kind of character and values he looked for in business partners. Mr. Goldman, Li Wei said through Sarah's translation, I can see that you understand the importance of taking care of your people. This tells me more about your company's values than any financial statement could. As the employee introductions concluded and the formal business discussion began, Sarah found herself in the unusual position of controlling a negotiation worth hundreds of millions of dollars. She was no longer the invisible janitor cleaning up after other people's successes. She was the key player in determining whether Goldman and Associates survived or collapsed. Li Wei outlined his concerns about the previous negotiations, speaking directly to Sarah in Mandarin, and trusting her to convey his meaning accurately to the Goldman team. He explained that he had felt rushed and disrespected by their earlier approach, and that the cultural insensitivity of their previous interpreter had damaged his confidence in their ability to work successfully in Asian markets. Sarah translated Li Wei's concerns, but she also provided cultural context that helped the Goldman team understand the deeper meaning behind his words. In Chinese business culture, she explained, relationships and trust were more important than quick profits or aggressive deal-making. Li Wei was looking for partners who would take time to understand his perspective and respect his values. Mr. Li, Sarah said, switching to Mandarin. Goldman and Associates recognizes that our previous approach was culturally insensitive, and we deeply regret any offense we may have caused. We have learned from these mistakes, and we are committed to building a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. Miss Johnson, I am impressed by your understanding of Chinese business culture. You clearly have great respect for our traditions. I have great admiration for the wisdom and values that Chinese culture represents. Most importantly, Sarah was able to address Li Wei's specific concerns about working with American companies. She acknowledged the cultural differences that had caused problems in the past, and she presented herself as a bridge between the two business cultures, someone who could ensure that future communications would be respectful and effective. Mr. Li, Sarah said, Goldman and Associates is proposing that I serve as the primary cultural liaison for all aspects of our partnership. This would ensure that all communications are culturally appropriate and that any potential misunderstandings can be addressed quickly and respectfully. Miss Johnson, what is your background in international business? Li Wei asked in Mandarin. Your understanding of Chinese culture is exceptional for an American. Li, I have a degree in international business, and I have been working in the financial industry for many years, Sarah replied in Mandarin. My role at Goldman & Associates has allowed me to observe and learn from many successful international negotiations. I have dedicated myself to understanding Chinese business culture because I believe that successful partnerships require deep cultural knowledge and mutual respect. As the negotiation progressed, Sarah found herself mediating not just language differences, but fundamental cultural and business philosophy differences. Li Wei was concerned about the environmental impact of the proposed manufacturing expansion, while Goldman's team was focused primarily on profit margins. Sarah helped both sides understand that these concerns were not mutually exclusive, and that addressing environmental issues could actually enhance the long-term profitability of the partnership. Li Wei was also interested in the social impact of the business relationship, particularly how it would affect workers in both countries. This was something that the Goldman team had never considered, but Sarah was able to articulate how the partnership could create good jobs and support communities on both sides of the Pacific. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah could see that Li Wei was becoming increasingly comfortable with the idea of working with Goldman & Associates. Her cultural sensitivity and language skills had addressed his primary concerns about communication and respect. Her business acumen had impressed him with its depth and sophistication. Most importantly, her personal story, though he didn't know all the details, represented exactly the kind of character and determination that he admired. By 6 p.m., the basic framework of a partnership agreement was taking shape. Li Wei had agreed to move forward with the original manufacturing partnership, but with several modifications that addressed his concerns about cultural sensitivity, environmental responsibility, and worker treatment. More significantly, Li Wei had specifically requested that Sarah be given a formal leadership role in the partnership, serving as the primary liaison between Tianlong Manufacturing and Goldman & Associates. He wanted her involved in all major decisions and communications, seeing her as the key to successful long-term cooperation between the two companies. "Miss Johnson," Li Wei said as the meeting began to wind down, "I would like you to visit our facilities in Shanghai next month to meet our team and see our operations firsthand. Your cultural understanding and business insight will be invaluable as we begin this partnership." A business trip to Shanghai as a senior executive rather than as a janitor. It was beyond anything she had dared to imagine that morning when she decided to approach Goldman. "I would be honored to visit your facilities, Mr. Li," Sarah replied in Mandarin. "I look forward to learning more about Tianlong Manufacturing and contributing to the success of our partnership." Speaking through Sarah's translation, he delivered an assessment that would change everything for Goldman & Associates. "Mr. Goldman, I was prepared to end our business relationship permanently because of the cultural insensitivity your company showed in our previous meetings," Li Wei said. "However, Ms. Johnson has demonstrated exactly the kind of cultural awareness and business intelligence that I look for in international partners. Her involvement in this partnership gives me confidence that we can work together successfully. You would be wise to recognize her value and give her the authority she deserves." "You did it," he said simply. "You saved the company. If I'm going to work here as an executive, I need to be treated as an equal by everyone in this building, not as someone who got lucky or who was granted a favor." Maria Gonzalez, the security guard who met Li Wei today, she has a master's degree in criminal justice and speaks 4 languages. Thomas Washington has a bachelor's degree in logistics management and has been quietly improving your supply chain operations for years. Janet Kim has been doing analyst-level work while being paid as an intern. Because I treat everyone with respect regardless of their job title. Because I understand that talent and intelligence exist at every level of an organization, but only if leadership bothers to look for it and nurture it. The company's culture needed to change if they wanted to build on the success of the Li Wei partnership. Over the next 6 months, Sarah Johnson's life underwent a complete transformation that exceeded even her wildest dreams. Goldman created a new position for her, Vice President of International Cultural Relations, with a starting salary of $180,000 per year, plus bonuses tied to the success of international partnerships. Her first bonus, based on the Li Wei deal closing successfully, was $300,000. Sarah's trip to Shanghai was a revelation. Li Wei introduced her to other Chinese business leaders, and word quickly spread about the American executive who truly understood Chinese culture and values. Within 3 months, Sarah had facilitated 2 additional partnerships worth a combined $400 million in revenue for Goldman and Associates. But the most satisfying aspect of Sarah's transformation was not the money or the prestige. It was the respect. For the first time in 8 years, she walked into the Goldman and Associates building as someone who belonged there. Executives who had never noticed her existence now sought her advice on international business matters. Junior employees looked up to her as proof that talent and hard work could be recognized and rewarded. Sarah also used her new position to advocate for other undervalued employees at Goldman and Associates. Maria Gonzalez was promoted to head of corporate security, with a salary increase of $40,000 per year. Thomas Washington became director of operations, earning recognition for the efficiency improvements he had been implementing quietly for years. Janet Kim was promoted to senior analyst with a salary that reflected her actual contributions to the company. More broadly, Sarah instituted new policies for employee development and recognition at Goldman and Associates. She created mentorship programs, skill development opportunities, and regular reviews that looked beyond job titles to identify hidden talents throughout the organization. The company's culture began to shift from one that valued pedigree and appearances to one that recognized ability and contribution. The financial impact of Sarah's work extended far beyond the Li Wei partnership. Her cultural expertise opened doors to business opportunities throughout Asia, Latin America, and Europe. Goldman and Associates' international revenue increased by 300% in Sarah's first year as vice president, making the company one of the fastest-growing investment firms in New York. Michael Goldman himself underwent a personal transformation, as dramatic as Sarah's professional one. Working closely with Sarah forced him to confront his own prejudices and assumptions about people based on their appearances, backgrounds, and job titles. He began treating all employees with greater respect and curiosity, asking about their backgrounds and aspirations, rather than simply assigning them roles based on surface impressions. Sarah taught me something that my expensive MBA education never did, Goldman told a business magazine interviewer. She taught me that the most valuable assets in any organization are often the ones hiding in plain sight. The key is to create a culture where people feel safe revealing their true capabilities. Sarah's influence helped Goldman reconnect with his family roots and the values that had originally shaped his character. Sarah's success story began attracting national attention. Business schools invited her to speak about cultural intelligence and hidden talent in organizations. She appeared on television programs discussing diversity, inclusion, and the importance of looking beyond surface appearances to find real ability. Her story became a powerful example of how organizations could unlock potential by changing their assumptions about who deserves opportunities. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from Li Wei himself. During a return visit to New York, he took Sarah to dinner at an exclusive Chinese restaurant in Manhattan. Over tea and conversation conducted entirely in Mandarin, he shared his own story of rising from poverty in rural China to become one of the country's wealthiest businessmen. "Miss Johnson," Li Wei said, "your story reminds me of my own journey. The world is full of people who judge others based on appearances rather than character and ability. Those who look deeper, who recognize talent wherever it exists, those are the people who create lasting success." Sarah was tempted by the offer, but she ultimately decided to stay at Goldman and Associates. She had invested 8 years of her life in the company, watching it grow and evolve. Now she had the opportunity to help it become the kind of organization that truly valued all of its people, regardless of their backgrounds or current positions. Instead of leaving, Sarah negotiated a new role for herself, Executive Vice President of Global Operations, with responsibility for all international partnerships and cultural relations. Her salary increased to $350,000 per year, plus equity participation that made her one of the company's largest individual shareholders. More importantly, she gained the authority to implement company-wide changes in hiring, promotion, and employee development practices. 2 years after the leeway meeting that changed everything, Sarah Johnson stood in the same conference room where she had once cleaned tables and emptied trash cans. But now she was leading a board meeting with Goldman & Associates senior partners, presenting the company's international expansion strategy to potential investors from around the world. The mahogany table that had once seemed so intimidating now felt like home, and the leather chairs that had cost more than her old monthly rent were simply tools of her trade. The transformation was complete, but it had not been without challenges. Some employees and executives at Goldman & Associates had struggled to accept Sarah's rapid rise from janitor to senior leadership. There were whispered comments about diversity hires and lucky breaks that diminished her obvious qualifications and spectacular results. Sarah had to prove herself repeatedly, working longer hours and achieving better results than her peers to silence the skeptics. But the numbers spoke for themselves. Under Sarah's leadership, Goldman & Associates' international revenue had grown from $200 million to $1.2 billion in just 2 years. The company had successfully entered markets in 12 new countries, established partnerships with major corporations across Asia and Latin America, and become one of the most respected American investment firms operating internationally. Sarah's personal wealth had grown along with the company's success. Her equity stake in Goldman & Associates was now worth approximately $15 million, and her annual compensation package, including bonuses and stock options, exceeded $800,000. She had purchased a beautiful brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn, just a few miles from the Bedford-Stuyvesant apartment where she had struggled to make ends meet as a janitor. But more than the money or the prestige, Sarah treasured the respect she had earned from colleagues, clients, and competitors throughout the international business community. She was regularly invited to speak at conferences, consulted by government agencies on trade policy, and quoted in major business publications as an expert on cross-cultural business relationships. The personal costs of her transformation had been significant as well. The stress of managing such dramatic life changes, combined with the pressure of proving herself in a new role, had taken a toll on Sarah's health and relationships. She had developed insomnia and anxiety, working such long hours that she barely had time for personal relationships or self-care. Her relationship with her son Marcus had become complicated by her success. He was proud of his mother's achievements, but also confused and somewhat resentful that she had hidden her education and abilities from him for so many years. "Why didn't you tell me you spoke 7 languages?" he had asked during a difficult phone conversation. "Why did you let me think you were just a cleaning lady when you were actually smarter than all my college professors?" The broader impact of Sarah's story extended far beyond her personal success or even Goldman & Associates' growth. Her transformation had become a symbol for hidden potential in organizations everywhere, inspiring companies to look more carefully at their existing employees rather than always hiring from outside. Business schools began teaching case studies based on Sarah's experience, examining how unconscious bias and cultural assumptions could blind organizations to talent that existed within their own walls. Management consultants developed new strategies for identifying and nurturing underutilized employees, recognizing that every organization probably contained Sarah Johnsons whose abilities were being wasted. Labor advocacy groups embraced Sarah's story as evidence that working-class people deserved more respect and opportunity. Her journey from minimum-wage janitor to millionaire executive proved that talent and intelligence existed at every economic level, and that society benefited when barriers to advancement were removed. Immigration advocates pointed to Sarah's multilingual abilities as proof that diversity was not just morally right, but economically valuable. Her success in opening Asian markets for Goldman & Associates demonstrated how cultural knowledge and language skills could create enormous business opportunities. Sarah herself became increasingly involved in social causes related to education, workforce development, and economic mobility. She established a scholarship fund for adult learners returning to school, recognizing that many people like herself had postponed their educational dreams due to economic necessity. The Sarah Johnson Foundation provided grants for language learning, professional development, and career transitions for working adults. She also worked with community colleges and adult education programs to develop curricula that would help working people develop business skills while maintaining their current employment. Sarah understood that not everyone could afford to quit their job and return to school full-time, so she advocated for flexible, practical educational programs that met people where they were. Most importantly, Sarah used her platform to challenge stereotypes about intelligence, ability, and worth based on job titles or educational credentials. In speeches and interviews, she consistently emphasized that her story was not unique. There were countless other people working in invisible jobs who possessed remarkable skills and untapped potential. The difference between me and millions of other workers is not intelligence or ability, Sarah often said. The difference is that I got lucky. Someone gave me a chance to prove what I could do. But luck shouldn't be the determining factor in who gets opportunities to advance. We need systems that actively look for and develop talent wherever it exists. Li had become not just a business partner, but a mentor and friend to Sarah. During their regular video conferences conducted in fluent Mandarin, he shared insights about leadership, cultural bridge building, and the responsibilities that came with success and influence. "Miss Johnson," Li said during one of their conversations, "you have become a symbol of possibility for people who have been overlooked and undervalued. That is a great gift, but also a great responsibility. Use your voice wisely." He began actively seeking out employees whose potential might be underutilized, creating mentorship programs and advancement opportunities throughout the company. Goldman & Associates became known as one of the most progressive investment firms on Wall Street, with industry-leading diversity statistics and employee satisfaction ratings. The company's culture shifted from one based on pedigree and connections to one that valued results, creativity, and cultural competence. Sarah didn't just save our company financially, Goldman reflected in a Harvard Business Review interview. She saved us morally and culturally. She forced us to become the kind of organization that deserves success because we actually value all of our people. Goldman had initially seen Sarah as a problem solver for a specific crisis, but he came to understand that she represented a completely different approach to business leadership. As Sarah's influence within the company grew, she pushed for changes that went beyond cultural sensitivity in international deals. She advocated for pay equity, flexible work arrangements, professional development opportunities for all employees, and transparent promotion criteria that focused on performance rather than personal relationships. These changes were not always popular with some of the more traditional executives, but the results spoke for themselves. Employee turnover decreased dramatically, productivity increased, and Goldman & Associates began attracting top talent from competitors who wanted to work for a company with a reputation for fairness and opportunity. Sarah's impact extended to the broader Wall Street community as well. Other investment firms began hiring cultural consultants and diversity officers, recognizing that international business success required deep cultural knowledge and that homogeneous leadership teams were liability in a globalized economy. The financial industry began developing new metrics for evaluating talent that looked beyond traditional credentials to assess actual capabilities and potential. Sarah's story had proven that the most qualified person for a job might not have the most impressive resume, but might have the most relevant skills and experience. 5 years after the meeting that changed her life, Sarah Johnson was featured on the cover of Fortune magazine as one of the 50 most powerful women in business. The article detailed her journey from invisible janitor to international business leader, but it also examined the broader implications of her success for organizational behavior and talent management. Sarah Johnson's story is not just about one woman's remarkable transformation, the Fortune article concluded. It's about the countless talented people who remain invisible in organizations everywhere, waiting for someone to see their potential and give them a chance to prove what they can do. Next to it, she hung a photograph of herself from 8 years earlier, wearing her cleaning uniform and pushing a cart through the Goldman & Associates offices. The contrast between those two images told the complete story of transformation, possibility, and the power of being seen for who you really are, rather than what you appear to be. As Sarah looked out the window of her corner office, watching the sun set over Manhattan, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The city sparkled below her, millions of lights representing millions of dreams, struggles, and hidden possibilities. Somewhere out there, she knew, were other people like her former self, brilliant, capable, multilingual individuals working in invisible jobs, waiting for someone to recognize their potential. Sarah had made it her mission to find them, to advocate for them, and to ensure that talent would be recognized and rewarded, regardless of where it was found. The transformation of Sarah Johnson was complete, but her real work was just beginning. She had proven that extraordinary people could be found in the most ordinary places, and now she was determined to make sure that discovery would no longer depend on luck, coincidence, or crisis. In boardrooms and conference halls around the world, Sarah Johnson continued to tell her story, not as a fairy tale of individual triumph, but as a challenge to every organization to look more carefully at the people they already employed. Because somewhere, in every company and institution, there were probably other invisible experts waiting to be discovered, other hidden talents ready to transform not just their own lives, but the success and culture of everyone around them. The janitor had become the CEO, but more importantly, the invisible had become visible, and the undervalued had become invaluable. And that transformation had changed not just Sarah Johnson's life, but the lives of everyone who learned to see potential where they had once seen only surfaces. This is the power of recognition, the magic of opportunity, and the endless possibility that exists when we look beyond appearances to discover the remarkable capabilities that surround us every day, waiting only for someone to believe in them and give them a chance to shine.